We've been talking about, that's hot. We've been talking about this cycle of loving your neighbors, moving people to loving God, and moving them to serving others, and then repeating this cycle. And this certainly doesn't include just unchurched people, but it includes us as well. We need to constantly be moving people throughout the cycle of the living out the second and the first greatest commands, and then moving each other to serving others, to getting into the lives of our neighbors and to serve them. Our theme this year is God first, and our theme verse is Deuteronomy 6:7. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. This final quarter of 2023, we're talking about God and others, connecting God with others. And what does that look like? How do we do that? Today specifically, we're talking about those who are first will be last, and those who are last will be what? First, right? Jesus repeats this often, and in Matthew, he repeats it in succession, and Matthew kind of bunches these stories together in a way that really gets our attention. And he's talking about a couple different themes here. He's talking about the coming of the kingdom, his inevitable death and resurrection, and taking on servanthood, which is exactly what we're talking about in this cycle, serving others and doing it humbly. I want to back up before we get into our text and kind of walk through a couple of these different passages. I'm not going to read them all. They're pretty lengthy, but I think this really begins, if not before, definitely in chapter 17 of Matthew, at the Transfiguration. So the Transfiguration was this really incredible event where Jesus takes the inner circle. He takes Peter, James, and John up on the mountain by himself. They go up on the mountain, and Jesus is transfigured before them. He becomes so bright that they can't see him anymore. They close their eyes. Peter gets confused. They see Moses and Elijah appear. They're talking with Jesus. And Peter says, hey, we need to build shelters for them. And Jesus kind of talks to Peter. And then they come down off the mountain, and Jesus warns them not to tell anybody until he has died and raised from the dead. Pretty incredible event. And, if you're there, if you're either Peter, James, or John, to have witnessed that would have been absolutely phenomenal. And then Jesus goes on, he heals this little boy with a demon. And then Matthew puts another story where Jesus foretells his death and resurrection again. So he's telling them, this is going to happen. I'm going to be raised on the third day. And the next sentence Matthew records, and they were greatly distressed. So it wasn't a surprise. They knew. I think they believed it. I don't think they knew the full extent of what was going to happen, but they believed it enough that his disciples were distressed. And then Matthew records in chapter 18, the disciples come to Jesus and they say, well, who is the greatest in the kingdom? And I don't know that this was kind of an arrogant question. I think they legitimately wanted to know who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. You keep talking about this kingdom and you keep talking about this death and resurrection. Who's going to be the greatest in that kingdom? And then we all know the story. Jesus takes a little child. He brings a child up and he says, unless you become like this little child, you won't enter the kingdom. He says, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And then he goes on and he says, anybody who would cause harm to one of these little ones of mine, it would be better for him to have, large millstone tied around his neck, and he'd be drowned in the depth of the sea. Then it goes on, he talks about temptation to sin, and then he talks about the parable of the lost sheep. And he begins by saying, see that you do not despise one of these little ones. Again, he's talking about, in the midst of the coming kingdom, the death and the resurrection, he's constantly talking about being last, being a servant, being a slave to others, serving people, being humble. And so he talks about the parable of the lost sheep. And he begins it by saying, see that you do not despise one of these little ones. Remember, he was just talking about the little children. You need to become like these little children. You need to be humble like these little children. And then he's talking about the whole flock, and he refers to them as these little ones. See that you don't despise any of them, but you treat them with kindness and humility. And if you see one of them stray, the good shepherd will leave the 99. He'll go seek out that lost one and gently bring that sheep back. Jesus is not talking about oppressors, abusers. This is where people mistake this, and it drives me insane. I talk about this all the time. I see churches bringing in known abusers who have clearly never repented, who are doing a lot of harm, and they say, but Jesus talks about the little sheep. There's a difference between sheep and wolves. He's not talking about bringing the wolves back into the fold. He's talking about fellow sheep. When somebody stumbles, when somebody's having problems in their life, don't despise them. Reach out to them, gently bring them back. And then he goes on, talks about your brother sinning against you. If your brother repents, forgive that brother. And then, of course, Peter says, well, how many times do we forgive him? We all know that passage. Then he goes on and he talks about the parable of the unforgiving servant. This is a servant who owed a lot of debt to the king. And the king, after this guy pleaded with the king said, okay, your debt's forgiven. And then that same servant went out and found a fellow servant who owed him a little bit of money. And he shook him down, put him in prison, threatened to lock up his family. And then the other servants reported that same servant back to the king, and the king was absolutely livid. And he said, I forgave all of your debt, but yet you went to another servant, and you didn't forgive his debt when he pleaded to you. And then there's a rich young man, and he comes to Jesus, and he says, what good deed do I have to do to get eternal life? And then Jesus said, well, what have you done? And he said, well, I've kept these different commandments. Jesus said, okay, great, perfect. If you want to be made perfect, though, go and sell everything you have and give that money to the poor. The guy goes away sad because he had a lot of wealth. And then Peter comes, and Peter says, see, we've left everything to follow you, Jesus. What will we have left? And then Jesus says to all of his disciples after Peter said that, truly, I say to you, in the new world, when the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother, children or lands for my name's sake will receive 100-fold and will inherit eternal life. And listen to what he says next. But many who are first will be last, and the last first. And then Jesus goes on. He's not done yet. He's far from being done. Then he goes on and he's talking about laborers in the vineyard. And remember, these different laborers came at different times throughout the day. And the guy said, well, why are you not working? Why are you standing around? And they say, well, it's because nobody asked us to work. Nobody offered us a job. So he hires them all, and then at the end of the day, he gives every single person one denarius. Well, then they start grumbling. Well, we started working earlier, and we got the same price as these other people who started late in the day, and that's not fair. And Jesus says this, the last will be first, and the first last. Immediately, he foretells his death and resurrection again. Are you starting to see a theme here? Matthew's piecing these stories together to highlight that Jesus is coming again. Clearly, he's going to die, he's going to be raised, and he's saying, those who are first will be last, and the last will be first. Humble yourself and become a servant. Be a servant to your fellow man. And then here's our text for today, the very next thing after Jesus predicts this again. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee, that is James and John's mother, came up to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, "What do you want?" She said to him, "Say that these 2 sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your kingdom." Now, I want to pause here for a second because I've read so many commentaries on this, and they talk about, the arrogance and the pride of the mother, and they talk about the arrogance and the pride of James and John. I don't take this story that way. I don't think it was an issue of arrogance. And a big part of that is because we just had the transfiguration where Peter, James, and John were there. And then we have all these instances of Jesus telling people, you need to be like little children. You have Peter saying, hey, we left everything to follow you. Followed by Jesus saying, by the way, all of you guys, all of you 12 here, are going to enter into my kingdom, and each of you is going to sit on his own throne. It's not far-fetched for them to say, all right, well, where are we in relation to your right hand and your left hand? I don't think this is arrogance. I don't think it's pride. I don't think they're lobbying for position in the kingdom. I don't think they're getting their mom to do their dirty work. By the way, it's kind of interesting. In Mark chapter 10, which is the same story, it's the parallel to this story. It's not their mother who asked Jesus, but it's James and John themselves who ask. And I know a lot of people are like, well, see, there's another contradiction in the Bible. Well, I don't think it's far-fetched to believe or to reason that both James and John and their mother asked Jesus in this instance. I think Mark records James and John are asking Jesus, and then Matthew records whenever their mom asked. I think they probably both asked, and they're trying to get some kind of clarification. And Jesus' response is absolutely magnificent. He answered, "You do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I'm to drink?" He's talking about his suffering. Are you able to suffer like I'm about to suffer? He's been telling them, I'm going to suffer, I'm going to be beaten. He was very specific. I'm going to be beaten, I'm going to be flogged, I'm going to be spit on. He was very specific when he was predicting his death and resurrection. Now he's asking them, are you able to drink that cup? Are you really able to suffer right beside me? And they said to him, we're able. He said to them, you will drink my cup. In other words, you will suffer. But to sit at my right hand and at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father. And when the 10 heard it, that is the 10 other apostles, they were indignant at the 2 brothers. Now, I've heard a lot of people say, well, they were mad because they wanted that position. And then, the other disciples, they came to Jesus first, and they're like lobbying for position. I don't think that's the case. My opinion, and I don't know if I'm right or not, my opinion is the other 10 actually were getting what Jesus had been telling them, to humble themselves, to be humble, to serve your fellow man, to be a servant, to be last. And I think when they heard that, they thought, why are these guys not remaining humble? Why are they asking them about positioning? It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter where we are, if we're at the right hand or the left hand of Jesus in the kingdom. What matters is that we serve our fellow man. They became indignant at the 2 brothers. I don't think it's because they wanted that position. I think they were indignant because they thought it doesn't really matter. But Jesus called them, verse 25, Jesus called them to him and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. It's interesting the use of words here. Diakonos is the word that he uses. It's where we get the word deacon. Very literally, it means somebody who kicks up dust. A servant is somebody who kicks up dust because their feet are moving. They're constantly moving and they're serving people. And so as they walk toward that person they're serving, they're kicking up dust. Another term for that, another translation, is somebody who waits on tables. Remember in Acts chapter 6, there's this food distribution problem among the widows, and the preachers say it would not be right for us to wait on tables, to give up preaching the word to wait on tables. This is the word that they use. So Jesus says, whoever's going to be great among you must be your servant. If somebody's going to be great, they have to serve. And whoever would be first among you, and see what he's doing? He's doing this compare and contrast. Somebody who's great has to be a servant, but if you want to be first, they must be a slave. They move from servant to slave, somebody who has this indebtedness to the master. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. I'll get to that picture here in a second. Do you understand what Jesus is saying? He's telling us if we want to connect with our fellow man, if we want to be the hands and the feet of Jesus, if we want to be first, if we really want to be by Jesus' right and left, that's not for him to decide. But what is that he commands us to be humble and to be kind and to put our fellow man first. To treat them with dignity and respect, to serve them and to do it humbly and to not complain. And I think, if anything, the past few weeks has showed me that there's faith in humanity. That there are people in this congregation, there are people who are nurses out there in the field who are absolutely serving. Being with Christina, spending so many hours with her, and several of us are breaking up that time. I certainly don't want to make it sound like I'm doing all this work. I'm not. We're really dividing our time and helping. Dave was an absolute miracle worker on Friday. I had Isaac home sick. Christina had an appointment with a nurse, and I couldn't be there, a home nurse. So I called Dave. I said, hey, is there any way you're able to go over and meet this nurse at the apartment? He said, absolutely, not even a question. Dave went over, he called me immediately, and he said, she's so weak, she could barely get up to answer the door. When the nurse got there, they determined she was too weak to be home alone. She needed respite care, so they called an ambulance, took her up to the hospice house in Wimber. Dave followed the ambulance up there and spent, almost 6 hours on Friday with Christina. Then about the time Dave left, I was on my way up to Johnstown. I went up and sat with her for a little while. I was, in the meantime, communicating with Travis. And I told Travis, what was going on. And he said, man, I can't get up there. I've been throwing up all day. I can't bring that to my mom. And so I went up there and I told Christina, she couldn't even talk. She was just so weak and in so much pain. And I told her about Travis, and I said, please don't think that he doesn't want to be here. He does. But he's sick right now. And she kind of whispered something, and I couldn't hear. I had to put my ear up to her mouth. And she said, is my sweet baby okay? And as sick as she was worried about her son. And this restores my faith in humanity on so many levels because this is this being lived out. You want to be first in the kingdom? Then be a servant. Be humble. Be kind. Treat your fellow man with dignity and respect. Put others first. Put others before your own interest and your own desires and all that stuff. We hear it, but when you see this lived out, it's absolutely breathtaking. It's phenomenal, and it shows you the face of Jesus put on other people. And I'm telling you that the nurses have been just absolutely top-notch, absolutely top-notch. And so in the middle of all this, this has kind of been progressing over the past week. And by the way, Kelly's here, and Kelly kind of quietly has been behind the scenes just doing all kinds of stuff for Christina, just working her tail off, being an absolute saint. Valinda, same thing. And I know there are more. I know more of you have been doing a lot. And then in the middle of all that, I get a message from Julian, a bunch of messages this week, and he's sending me pictures and videos, and he's like, "Hey, I just want to thank you so much. I want to thank you for the money that you guys gave." Now that was back, the beginning of this year. "I want to thank you for that money because this motorcycle is allowing me to do ministry." And he said, even though there's a big problem with gas, the gas prices in Haiti have shot through the roof again. I mean, it's outrageously overinflated. He said, "I want to thank you for this gift, and I thank God every day," because he said, "I'm able to do ministry and help people." So this is one of the pictures he sent. That's 5 of them on top of the motorcycle, and that's actually not many. I've seen them stacked like 9 deep on these motorcycles. But these little kids here, that's Julian there in the camo hat. These little kids are on their way to the hospital. He took them by moto to the hospital, and Dave and I were just talking before church started here. These kids have to be very sick to take them to the hospital. This is not like, "Oh, I'm under the weather, so I'm going to go get checked out by a doctor." This is not America. You have to pay cash to even walk through the door at a hospital there, or they won't see you. He's still using money that we sent clear back. Remember, we had a little bit of extra money when we sent money for the motorcycle? He's still using that money. He's stretching this money out to do this kind of work. So he sends me this, and he said, I want to thank you, and please ask that God continues to bless me to be able to use this motorcycle. I have Dave, I put kind of a video montage together, and the first one is Julian talking and showing himself, and he's showing the motorcycle, and if you notice, he still has the plastic wrapping on this motorcycle from when it was brand new. He never took the plastic off of it. And he told me, "I'm going to treat this like it's my own baby." And he really is. But he says he's far, far away from Cap Haitian, and he went to a funeral, and he sent me that video to say, "Thank you for allowing me to be able to do this." And then the second video is of him with these kids on the motorcycle, and then the next one is him in the hospital with this little boy in the yellow shirt. So if you would show the video here, Dave.
I am very far from Cape Haitian. I use my motorcycle to come here to participate at a funeral. Thank you, Lord, for this motorcycle. Yeah, we have a problem gas in Haiti, but I use the motorcycle to come here. Thank you, Lord. This is a cast for me. This is for my wife.
Photo.
Non, vidéo à la. Mettre photo virer. Mettre avancer sur nous. Oui. La bouillon? Ah, ok. On va mettre dans ça. Si dans ça, il va en avoir comme ça. Bon monde. Vous criez, oui? Ouais. On va mettre dans ça. Dans ça va crier.
Two of me. That's terrible, isn't it? One is enough. One is enough. I wanted to share that with you because, there's so many blessings. And Julian, I'm telling you, to say he does not have money is an understatement. And yet, he does this work willingly. He does this work constantly. This man constantly is serving other people. He's caring for other people. His own health is not in the best shape. He's a diabetic. And he really has to watch himself. But he's constantly taking care of other people. And he sends me messages all the time, just updates and thanking the congregation here. And he says, without this congregation, I wouldn't be able to do this work. Last night, he sent me another message, another picture of kids. And these are kids, orphans that he picked up in Port-au-Prince. And if you know anything about what's going on in Haiti, right now, Port-au-Prince is an absolute war zone. The gangs have completely overtaken Port-au-Prince. And I don't know what the circumstance was. He didn't really tell me, but somehow he wound up probably by moto, which is a really long ride. And he brought these orphans back from Port-au-Prince. He probably heard about them, that they were homeless, they were orphans, and he went, picked them up on his moto, brought them back. And I mentioned this before, they take turns sleeping in his house. They sleep in shifts, and a group of them will go outside in the middle of the night while the others are sleeping, and a lot of them are sleeping on the floor. And then they swap out, and then the next group. So they're sleeping in shifts, and this is their daily routine life. This is their everyday life. And so Jesus, I think he really, really meant that. That those who are first will be last, and those who are last will be first in the kingdom. If we really want to connect God to others, we'll take that position. We'll humble ourselves, and we'll stop trying to do things for ourselves all the time and stop complaining and stop, worrying about all this other stuff in life, and we'll just go out and we'll serve people and we'll do it happily. God does bless this, and he blesses the people who do it. And I just want to encourage you with that message. And go out this week, find people to bless. Don't overcomplicate it. Just bless people. If there's anybody this morning who's not yet taken the step to put Christ on in baptism, or if you have prayer needs, we'd invite you to come up as we all stand and sing a song together.